Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone for this first joint webinar between Save the Children and Deaf Child Worldwide. We're really happy to see everyone here. It would be great if in the chat box you could write your name, role, and where you're calling in from today. Just please do go on mute if you're not speaking, and will you please stay off camera unless you're asked to come on camera today. Thank you very much. Any questions or comments that you may have, please do put them in the chat box and we will try to get to them throughout the webinar today. If we do not have enough time, we will then come back with an email with all of the questions and responses included within that. Next slide, please. Okay, so today's webinar is in collaboration with Deaf Child Worldwide, a leading organization working with deaf children. It will focus on the barriers that deaf children face in accessing a quality education and provide some tips and strategies on how we can meaningfully engage and include deaf children within Save the Children's education programming. We will also have a panel discussion asking some key questions around deaf education with an opportunity for participants to ask their own questions. So where does this fit into Save the Children's present education strategy and top 5 priorities? So if we remember, top priority number 3 is about addressing barriers to equity. And this has a specific focus on equitable participation and outcomes for children who are most affected by inequality and discrimination. This includes children with disability, and then within that group, deaf children, which will be a focus of this webinar today. Next slide, please. And so let's frame it in terms of Save the Children's quality learning framework. So we know that this framework has an emphasis on what enables quality education and quality learning, which has a focus on access and inclusion. So the QLF states that the education provided must respond to individual abilities and include proactive strategies to address these inequalities and discrimination that act as barriers to participation. The QLF also states that a quality education must ensure access and inclusion throughout a child's life and respond to the needs at different stages and points of transition. So what does that mean? It means that each and every child should have the opportunity to enroll and complete all stages of education from ECD to secondary school. So when we're talking specifically about deaf children, we're saying that they should be able to go from ECD and go all the way through primary school and all the way up into secondary school and complete it. Next slide, please. So here we've got a poll. So if the poll could please be shared. And our question is, what do you feel is the first essential skill deaf children need to have on starting school? And we've got 4 possible answers there: literacy, social emotional, language, or numeracy. Please just make your selection over the next few seconds. And if the results can also be shared as they come in. This question is not going to be replied to now, but it's going to be responded to throughout the rest of this webinar. So please do keep in mind that question. Okay, I'm seeing the results coming in now. So we've got social, emotional, and language. We've got none for literacy and numeracy. Okay, so I'm now very excited to introduce you to our presenters and panelists from Deaf Child Worldwide. So our first presenter is Rose Nigawaka, an inclusion advisor for DCW in East Africa, and our second presenter is Kanika Agarwal, a consultant technical advisor on deafness for DCW in South Asia. They will both give a brief overview of the work of DCW and will then move on to the barriers and strategies that can be used to support deaf children in education. And then we will go to the panel. So now over to Rose.
Thank you very much, Crystal. As she said, my name is Rose, Inclusion Disability Advisor with Deaf Child Worldwide in East Africa. So we'll do a brief presentation about what we do and who we are. Next slide, please. Deaf Child Worldwide is an international arm of the National Deaf Children Society. It's like an international department, and we work in 2 regions, in East Africa and in South Asia. And in East Africa, we work in Kenya and Uganda. And in South Asia, we work with India and Bangladesh. So how we work is we work through local partners. We do not directly implement the project, but we partner with the local organizations to implement the projects. We provide funding and technical expertise on deafness. The next slide, please. So that's just a brief about who we are. I'll briefly now talk about our global programs. We've done quite a lot in the last 20 or so years, 20 plus years, and we're still doing so much in terms of deafness. Some of the work that we have done so far are, number one, we did a research on the early language development for the deaf children in partnership with University College London. And this research later gave birth to a project that we'll later talk about in brief. Number two, we also do a lot of program work on safeguarding and safeguarding of the deaf children. We've developed a training manual to guide our partners on how best to safeguard the deaf children. Because we noticed that most of the safeguarding training manuals which are out there are not really tailor-made to address the issues of the deaf children, like language barriers, like children who do not have a language, who cannot be able to express themselves or even explain what is happening. So that's where our safeguarding training manual comes in, to address specific issues of the deaf children and what they face. Then the other thing we also do is provide online trainings on deafness, creating awareness on deafness. We do a lot of trainings on how to teach deaf children. We also have done so many other webinars around deafness. And finally, we strengthen the capacity of our partners, of our partner organizations. So the next slide, please. Some of our work in East Africa are, for instance, number one, we developed sign language booklets for Kenya and Uganda. And also we did some for Tanzania. So these are specifically to help the parents and the deaf learners based on the home side, so that they can be able to communicate with each other at home. Because we noticed most of the parents cannot communicate with their deaf children. So these booklets are very helpful. And secondly, what we have done is develop online resources for the deaf children or the deaf schools in Kenya. We have adapted the curriculum to a visual format to help our teachers provide quality education for the deaf children. We also provided support to parents, parent support groups in Uganda. And Uganda has one of the best support groups because they even have constructed a school for their deaf children, which is a very big plus. Then after our research on the early language profiling toolkits, we decided to implement a pilot project to test the the viability of our interventions and if they can actually accelerate the language development of the deaf children. We finished the first phase and the results were really beyond our expectation. The number of deaf children who benefited hugely, more than we expected. Now we're doing the second phase, but now we are targeting a different group of deaf children and their parents as well. We're really excited to see the results, which should be out soon. And lastly, we support the deaf young people to access employment opportunities. So that's just a brief about what we have done in East Africa. So I'll hand over to my colleague, Kanika, to talk about what we have done in India.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kanika. That's my sign name. And I'm from India. So there's been a lot of work that's been happening through DCW in the South Asian region. And just like Rose said, there are many, many activities that we've been involved in with partnering with various organizations to safeguard young children. We've also been working in creating content, manuals, training programs for with the partners. We also have gotten involved in supporting teachers of how to build communication skills with deaf children, and also created the framework. Additionally, we have also tried to work in the area of advocacy with the government to extend support to various organizations that work with deaf children. We very recently started off with the early intervention or the early years program, which caters to the rural spaces in India, in the South Asian regions. There are quite a few actually. I've just listed the most important ones here. So I'm very happy that you all have joined the session, and thank you so much for being part of this discussion. And I hope that together we could come up with the best ideas to support and create a safe environment for deaf children. Now I would request for the poll to be shown here, and then we can take the session ahead. Thank you. Rose, over to you.
So, okay, that's as we wait for the answers, what percentage of the deaf are born of hearing parents? That's the question. So you can click on the answer that based on what you think. %50 of us saying 11 saying 50%. I think the highest is 25%. Okay, the correct answer is 90%. The next slide, please. Yeah, 90% of the deaf children are born of hearing families. That means chances of a hearing person giving birth to a deaf child are higher than a deaf person having a child who is deaf. And the previous poll we asked about the most important skills for the deaf children to have, and some of us said social, emotional, some others said language. As a deaf child worldwide, we say language is number one. And one of the main reasons is because without the language, a child may not be able to socialize, may not be able to read, may not be able to do much. Language is everything. The child in their life or in a human's life. Something which separates us from the animals is the language. And as we said, 90% of the deaf children are born of hearing families. That means most of them do not have access to quality language by the time they are joining school. For a hearing baby, they start learning through hearing. the incidental learnings. They learn they pick up words as they go by, they can express themselves. By the time they're joining school, they're ready. But that's not the case for our deaf children. Next slide, please. Now I want to hand over to my colleague Kanika to talk briefly on how best to support deaf children who are in school and who are still struggling with the language and communication. Over to you, Kanika.
Thank you, Rose. To set the foundation of this discussion, in all honesty, we do realize that there's a lot of language deprivation. When deaf children join a school, they have no language base with them. And this also additionally, a lot of hearing teachers who work with deaf children, they feel that the deaf children are not intellectually very strong. Deaf children, on the other hand, can make notes. They can copy from the blackboards. They can copy content from whatever is visually available for them. But that is not the way to learn. And to change this, I will share an example with you. If we are working with very young children, if you're talking to very young hearing children, you talk to them about an apple tree or you talk to them about the apple fruit, and you will tell them that, the apple comes from the apple tree. But when you talk about the same concept with deaf children, you will not only talk about the apple tree, you will talk to them about, the various trees that are there, like the banana, the orange tree, the mango tree, the apple tree, and you build the foundation of language with them. So the more you communicate with a deaf child, it helps build language for them. And that also initiates the incidental learning environment for them. This is how we build language skills for deaf children. And you can give whatever option works for a deaf child, whether it is sign language, whether it is any other communication mode, whatever works for them, you provide the child. And you cannot be very concise when you're working with deaf children. You have to be you have to elaborate, you have to, be more descriptive when you're talking to them and start from the very basic. Talk to them about the different trees, give them more details about what you're talking about. And also repetitive discussions. So maybe you could talk to them about one concept and, the week later you would continue with the same concept, probably add something new to it. Ask them whether they remember what was the previous conversation all about. So you go back and forth, with both during that training. So this really helps a deaf child. Also, while teaching, a lot of hearing teachers, have this habit. Educators have this habit. They tend to say that deaf children are not at par with hearing children. But that is not true. If we have the right resources in place, if we have used the right methods, definitely a deaf child will be at par with the hearing child. And we cannot really force deaf children to, be at the same level with with the hearing children. We should remember that a deaf child does not have the opportunity for incidental learning in his environment. Hence, it is very important for us to ensure that we build resources, we connect with the deaf child instead of forcing the deaf child to connect with us. And if we use this model, we definitely be able to see some achievements that these deaf children can show. Also, while teaching, if you build a very interactive session, you allow the child to function a little independently. You provide some clues, some hints. That always helps a child to think for himself. And that's also a sense of empowerment that goes to the deaf child. What really, really helps is having a lot of visual material with minimal text, but more visual content on it, which really helps build a very strong foundation and also supports in second language learning. So these are a few things that we need to keep in mind while training deaf children. Next slide, please. Also, what is really important is with hearing children, when you start teaching them, we usually give them some background to the context, right? You tap on their background knowledge that they have about a certain concept. With deaf children, what we do is we also do the same thing. We tap on their background knowledge. We try and give them examples that are more relatable for them. For example, you're talking to them about photosynthesis. Now, that's a complicated topic that you would talk to deaf children about. But yes, it can be simplified. You would tell them that when we eat food, how does that food get digested and how that converts to energy for us, right? So that's where you're setting the foundation for the deaf child. And that energy helps us to do the various tasks that we're supposed to do. Now you go back to the subject, you say when plants need to create their own food and have their own energy, the process that they use is photosynthesis. And that you then describe the whole photosynthesis process to them. So this becomes relatable as well as visually appealing for a deaf child, and again, the child gets clarity. So the teachers have to have an analytical, preview of how to do and how to reach out to deaf children, and always ask them, what do you think? How could this be? What do you think? How did this come about? So this allows them to feel more engaged, and they would also be able to start, utilizing the knowledge that they have picked up. With hearing children, the environment is very accessible. They also have a lot of hearing role models that they look up to. We also need to have deaf role models in the environment so that deaf children will have someone to look up to and be able to, look at a better future for themselves. So there is a need to have deaf role models. That's very important. If we ensure that there is a lot of visual support, there is a lot of visual aid in the environment, it does get a little tedious, it does get a little difficult. So we need to give breaks, because focusing on lip reading, focusing on sign language can be tiring, right? So we need to give these small breaks. Maybe we can check with the children whether they need to take a breather, or we could decide for ourselves and take a break in between. And definitely, yes, while all of this that we've just stated, it's so easy to talk about, right? But we get that into practice, it's not easy. Sometimes it is overwhelming, and sometimes it's tiring. So we have to be very, very patient. And if you build the right environment, the children are going to ask you a lot of questions, right? Probably they'll have a lot of questions because they have no communication at home. And this is the first space that the deaf children have communication, and it kind of inspires them, motivates them, and they get hungry for more information, and they will start asking a lot of questions. So we need to be very patient and keep answering their questions and ensure that they can progress. So if you would want to look at the various strategies that you can implement working with deaf children, I would then pass this over to Rose, and Rose could discuss further. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Kanika. Thank you, participants, for your engaging questions. We'll come to some of these questions later, but let me talk briefly on the deaf-friendly education setting and how it looks like, or what we need to implement or to ensure that education is accessible to the deaf children. Number one, they must plan to create an inclusive environment. Think about the classroom. It must have proper lighting, must have good seating arrangement. They use the horse shape and other things. We must have a clear plan on how to achieve that. And secondly, stakeholders must have a good awareness in terms of deafness. By that we mean the teachers who are teaching the deaf children, because in most cases, you find the teachers who are recruited in the deaf schools, don't even know sign language, or the workers around the school, the security guards, the cleaners, the cook, and many others who are around. They know nothing about deafness, the board members. So it's important to create awareness about deafness. Then thirdly, I have a plan to overcome the communication barriers. One of the biggest challenges that we've noticed is communication for the deaf children. The teachers are not able to communicate with the deaf child or the level of the child. The levels are not the same, so we must have a clear plan. Then the other one is teaching in the appropriate methods and strategies. As we mentioned before, most of the deaf teachers or teachers for the deaf are not fully trained or comprehensively trained on inclusive education and how best to teach deaf children. So we need to provide them with a comprehensive training on that. And also have advocacy efforts to change and adapt the curriculum, because most of the curriculum are developed without the deaf children in mind. And most of the curriculum are standard for all. And yet, most of the deaf children face different challenges from the hearing children because they join school without a language. So we need to lobby the government to adapt the curriculum to fit with the deaf children's needs. And lastly, make sure the physical environment is safe for the deaf children. Their emotions are well taken care of, provide the appropriate counseling care, and also social and learning environment. By that we mean most of the deaf children in the residential schools, the boarding schools, and the hearing children can have a school nearby their home, so they don't need to sleep at the school. So the children, remember, the deaf children are also emotional about being away from their families. So we also need to have quality care on that. And I think that's just briefly about what a deaf education setting looks like. With that, I will hand over to Crystal to take us to the next part of this training. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rose and Kanika. I think that was wonderful, just hearing about some of the barriers which we face, and then providing some strategies and some tips, and then actually giving us a really nice example of what a deaf-friendly education environment would look like. So thank you so much, and I know we are going to hear much more from you in the next few minutes as well when we go to the panel. So we have one more question for everyone. And this is actually considering the work that Save the Children is presently doing on education, which involves deaf children. So if we can share the poll, please. And the question is the work that we do at Save the Children in education accommodating the needs of deaf children? Okay. So I think, we've got about 50% who are saying sometimes we are accommodating the needs, but we also have 37% who are saying we are not accommodating the needs of deaf children within our education programs, which means that we do need to think more kind of strategically and in detail as to what we can do specifically for this group of children to ensure that we are managing to fulfill everything which we say within our strategy and also the quality learning framework. Next slide, please. So our next part of this webinar is a panel discussion with also opportunity for questions and answers. Now our panel is the wonderful Kanika and the wonderful Rose, who you've already heard from. And we have 4 questions which we are going to ask them. And if we have time at the end, we may have an opportunity for questions from the audience as well. So the first question, which is going to Kanika, is Save the Children, as do all organisations, have a mandate of do no harm throughout our programming. Can DCW provide some concrete examples of where organisations have been well-intentioned to support deaf children but have ultimately caused harm? Over to you, Kanika.
All right. So this is a very complex topic, really. As a teacher and working with deaf children, I always want to be, provide a very positive environment for deaf children and ensure that we do not negatively impact the deaf child. Very often, the teachers do not really want to create an environment that is negative. However, it sometimes does happen in hindsight. I'll share an example here of my experience. Yes, and my personal experience. I was in an inclusive schooling environment, and all the students would be speaking to one another, and I was the only deaf there, so I would feel very left out. As I grew up, I went into a deaf space where there were a lot of deaf people, deaf students, and while I was growing orally, if that worked well for me, if I had good language skills, probably if I started off with this deaf school and then moved to a hearing environment, I think that would have been easier for me, right? But when I started off with a hearing environment, being the only deaf person there, it felt very lonely. I didn't have friends. I could not interact with anyone. So on the other hand, if I had a deaf school that I was a part of, I would feel that that was a safe deaf space for me. And my actual experience was that I was feeling left out. I was feeling, I lost a lot of confidence. I was feeling confused all the time, right? But however, this is not the same for everyone. There are certain deaf people who are oral, who have mild to moderate hearing loss, and they can manage pretty well in a mainstream or an inclusive setup. However, profoundly deaf individuals find it very difficult, and it becomes very emotionally daunting for them. Another example that I would share is, if you look at teachers, how would you provide the right communication environment for deaf children or communication opportunities for deaf children? If there is a hearing teacher who's unable to express or communicate, and likewise the students are unable to communicate with the hearing teachers, there's a lot of gap that develops there between the teachers and the students, and that's not really very helpful. In the same way, when we use hearing aids, right? Oh, it's a good idea to have hearing aids if it's really useful, if it's really beneficial. But hearing aids don't really help all deaf children, no? So at that time, what does a deaf child do? If the child has auditory input, if the child does benefit through, the hearing aid or other hearing devices, definitely yes, that should be an option. But there should also be other options that you could work with together with the hearing aid. So there are so many places, so many countries where the testing is not done very accurately. The very short, quick fix really is to just provide a hearing aid, but does it really benefit a deaf child? That's a question that we need to ask. We need to check whether it's really helping, whether it's helping with the auditory input. And you also need to look at what are the options that work better for a deaf child, whether it's sign language or any other communication mode. So these are a few examples that I think, while we have the right intention, our heart is in the right place, we want to provide the support, but we need to also check whether it's really working for them. Is it really helpful in terms of building auditory, hearing skills? Is it helping with speech? You have to check all these things. It's just not a one fix that we provide and end it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kanika. Rose, do you have anything to add to that question about doing no harm?
Maybe just a couple of things in brief. Sometimes we do things not really intentionally, but by the end of the day, it harms the children in some way. For instance, like as Kanika has mentioned, we provide the hearing aids. And what I've noticed growing up, we had some of our friends got hearing aids, and those hearing aids made their hearing loss worse. The degree of hearing loss worse than it was before. And it became profound. So when you're providing hearing aids, make sure they're very appropriate. The other thing is on community sensitization, especially when giving hearing aids to the children in the rural areas. And we're not sensitizing the community as to why this child is wearing the hearing aid. That can create a lot of discrimination and stigma. Because that used to happen to us in the village. People start following you, calling, shouting your name, thinking that I can hear perfectly, which is not the case. And I was really made fun of. The other thing, sometimes when you're working with the deaf children, you engage interpreters who may not be qualified to provide quality interpretation services to the deaf children. Maybe the interpreter hasn't understood what the deaf child has said, and they voice the wrong things. And if you don't know sign language, then it's hard to detect if the interpreter is voicing the appropriate thing or not. And sometimes that can also create a lot of bring a lot of harm to the deaf child. So just a brief addition. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rose and Kanika, for those responses. I mean, I think that really does give us some food for thought, and that we need to consider what we are doing in our programming to ensure that we are not doing any harm. You know, for example, affecting the social emotional well-being of the child, their confidence, ensuring we have that community sensitization, and also thinking about when we do provide hearing aids, that it is for the right reasons. Our second question, which you already touched upon in your presentation previously, I think it was you, Rose, about talking about language skills, is can you explain why it is so important for deaf children to have language skills for when they start school? And I think the question's going to Kanika first. Is that correct?
Right. So earlier, Rose explained this, that when a child is born with deafness, we went through the poll as well, where 90% of deaf children are born in hearing families. So when a hearing family, has a deaf baby with them, they are totally unaware of what they need to do with the deaf child. They are not sure of what needs to be done, how they need to provide support to the deaf child. And they wait for a couple of years till they realize what needs to be done, or the child needs to be enrolled in a school. So all this time is lost. And for a deaf child, also identification of deafness happens pretty late, very often. So there's no communication right from birth till, a couple of years. Also, there isn't enough awareness available in most regions, most countries. So parents are constantly in a state of confusion. Someone advises them that you should try using a hearing aid. Someone would advise that you need to just, focus on speech therapy, build on speech skills. And the parents are constantly running from one space to the other, trying to understand. But do they really realize that speech is not the same as language? That's a big question that everyone needs to know. There is this misconception that speech and language are the same thing. So if there is no speech, there would be no language, but that's not really the fact. And this is something that a lot of people believe in, that if you have no speech, there will be no language skills. And so it's really important that, the right information is provided to parents. So they have the opportunity to take the right choice for their children. Parents, the children do not have the opportunity for incidental learning from the environment because there's not enough visual support around them that leads to language deprivation. So if we really need to, if a deaf child needs to communicate, whom will he communicate with? If people around him are speaking, and what would the child understand and reproduce in terms of communication? How would he express himself? That also doesn't allow for the child to start thinking and imagining a lot of stuff at that age. Hence, it is very important that you have language from the very beginning for a deaf child, and that is why language is important. And it's a huge responsibility that we need to all look at.
Thank you.
Rose, would you like to add something there?
Yeah, maybe just a bit. On why language is essential. Number one, it enhances the cognitive development of the deaf child, because without the language, it is difficult for a deaf child to move to literacy. As we mentioned earlier, the current curriculum focuses on literacy because it assumes that every child who joins school already has a language. But for the deaf child, they don't have. They cannot start with the literacy. And that's one of the main reasons why deaf children are struggling academically, because it doesn't focus on their language development before they move on to the literacy. And secondly, it also enhances social skills, social interactions. Without the language, it is hard for them to interact with their peers, because at the end of the day, how will they communicate? How will they be able to express themselves? How will they be able to participate in the different activities if they don't have a language? So they will always be isolated. A language also enhances accessibility to information. Once a child or a deaf adult can be able to read and write, they can understand what is going on in the environment. Whereas they can read books on their own, they can read the newspapers and understand the society and understand a lot of things. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rose and Kanika. That was really kind of illuminating for me, and I'm sure it was for others as well. So our next question is, what recommendations do you have for incorporating sign language into our programs? Most of our teacher training or teacher professional development sessions are limited to a few weeks total per year. So what other avenues should we use to ensure that deaf children have access to sign language communication? Who would like to answer that first? Rose?
Yeah, can go first. Yeah, thank you, Crystal, for that question. It also relates to the questions that we asked on the chat, the questions that are on the chat. And what we can do is, number one, we need to have qualified deaf teachers, teachers who have comprehensive training, undergone a comprehensive training, or even if it's a hearing teacher, but they have the sign language skills. The other thing is, I can recommend is employ the teacher assistants. In Kenya, we call them the learner support assistants, and they must be fluent with the language and provide sign language skills to be able to teach the deaf children. Children who are for the teachers who are teaching in the deaf schools. Then number three, we also need to have an in-service education for the deaf teachers. For instance, we can have every morning we can have an hour session on sign language lesson for all the teachers. That's what I used to do in my primary and high school. For the teachers who have been recruited and they don't know sign language, we provided continuous sign language classes every morning to help them catch up with the sign language skills. So that's just briefly. Maybe Kanika has something else to add.
So, Rose, the points that Rose has shared are definitely, I agree with all of these. I would additionally add, when you're hiring teachers, educators, especially when you're looking at, rural spaces, definitely, yes, there is a dearth of resources with sign language skills. So what you can do is look for people who are more comfortable using gestures. Some people are, innately more, are more expressive with body language, facial expression. So try and get them on board, because when they use their body language, they use their gestures and facial expressions, that really works well with deaf children if they do not have sign language skills. And previously we discussed with the previous question, why is language important? So, right, definitely, yes, language is important. It's the first part of for any child. Because language, it promotes communication, it supports communication, and there are various means how you can support a deaf child to communicate better, to learn to express themselves, and that will really help the child move ahead at a good pace. So the various methods of communication is also something that you need to think of when you're working with deaf children.
Thank you, Kanika and Rose, for that response. As in, we just have one more question, which I think we will manage to fit in with the time we've got, because both of you have already touched on this to some degree. So our final question is, within our Save the Children programs, we may procure hearing aids for children who are deaf. Can you please explain some of the benefits and disadvantages in the provision of hearing aids? I know you've already spoken about some of these, but just in case you have any additional comments to make on this. And maybe we can go to Kanika first.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Crystal. Thank you so much for this question, because it resonates with me. I used a hearing aid from a very young age, and I didn't have a very pleasant experience. So here is what I shared. At a very young age, I started using the hearing aid, and the doctor, the audiologist that we spoke to said that, Kanika, this is the hearing aid that you need to use. And they did inform my parents that she would not definitely be, hearing like a hearing person. However, the family always thought, while Kanika is using the hearing aids, can she access sounds completely from the television or from the environment? But that was not a fact, right? So, I mean, even within the family, they would all keep thinking, I would keep thinking that, I'm using the hearing aids and I could probably hear better, I could speak better. And then we went back to the audiologist and we told them that, I'm not really I don't find a lot of benefit. But we've always advised, you keep trying and you'll definitely be able to hear like a hearing person and speak like a hearing person. And I tried, I really did try, but I did not succeed. I failed, literally. Towards the end of it, I started feeling very negative about myself. I started feeling that, probably something's wrong with me. I am flawed. I am unskilled. I am unable to do, use the hearing aid to its optimum. And everyone else is better off than me. And, so it brought in a lot of negative feelings and a lot of negative talk for myself. And then when I got into a sign language environment and I saw a lot of deaf people signing, it really changed my environment, and it took me back to those previous negative thoughts that I had. And I was like, it was just wasted energy, that I was thinking so negatively that something was wrong with me. I was flawed. Also, we had to be so careful using the hearing aids, ensure that it doesn't get wet, ensure that, the battery is working fine. It is a financial, expense that the family has to look after. And it sometimes is a little difficult financially. It's an added expenditure from the day-to-day routine living. I started feeling that I was a burden for my family. And it was not a nice feeling. I would feel bad so often about it. And however, when I interacted with the deaf community, I saw that a lot of deaf people, some of them were using hearing aids, some of them were not, but everyone was signing. And I was amazed to see the confidence that everyone had, and that was so beautiful. And I thought that is what I need to learn from there. And then I decided to, take off the hearing aid completely. And I didn't want to use it. I was at the age of 20 when I decided to stop using the hearing aid. But before that, I was. And now it's been years since then till now. So that is my personal experience. And there are some experiences, some deaf friends of mine who are very happy with their hearing aids. So not everyone has the same experience. Some of us share the same lived experience, while others share a different experience. Some are happy, while some are not. So it depends, where the hearing aid is really beneficial, how much it supports, and how we could really, use it to its optimum. Rose, would you like to add something to that?
Maybe just a few things. The hearing aid is good because it can improve speech, especially for the children who have mild hearing loss. They can benefit quite a lot with the hearing aid, and also can enhance social interaction. Then the other side effects, I don't think I have anything else to add because you already mentioned, and also Kanika has talked about her experience of using the hearing aid. Thank you.
Thank you so much both, and also for that personal experience. I think that really brought it to life. Next slide, please. And Shampa from DCW is just going to talk very briefly about some of the resources available.
Hello, I'm Shampa. I'm the head of the South Asia program at Deaf Child Worldwide. If you'd like to find out anything more about the work we do, the resources we have, you can visit our website. You've got the URL on the screen, which is www.deafchildworldwide.org. If you have any questions for us, some of you have asked about resources, please email us at the info email address, which is info@deafchildworldwide.org. And finally, we have a very short animated video related to deafness and deaf children. So if you have time, do visit this YouTube link and watch the video. I think it's just about a minute, or I might have got that wrong, but it's a very short video. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we have 1 minute left. And I just want to say a huge, huge thank you to everyone at DCW, and especially Kanika and Rose, who have been our wonderful presenters and panelists. We have loved having you. And also a massive thank you as well to our Kenyan Sign Language interpreters, Joan and George, and also to our Indian Sign Language interpreters, Shivoy and Atia, and also to our live captioner, Kate, and also everyone behind the scenes, as in this is, there's been a lot of people working behind the scenes to get this working for you all. So I hope that you've enjoyed the webinar as much as we all have. Thank you so much. Please do keep your questions and everything coming in too. There is also a post-session survey, which if you have time to complete, please do, as in this will really help us frame like future webinars, and great collaboration between Save for Children and Deaf Child Worldwide, and we hope it will continue. So thank you everyone, and goodbye.